With Pep Guardiola in his fifth season as Manchester City manager, I'm going to be taking a look at whether his time there has been either a success or a failure. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break down each season, break down the results, the transfers, and I'm also going to be looking at the goals for each season. First off, we're going to be starting with 2016-2017, his first season as Manchester City manager. He was being let go by Bayern Munich for failing to win the Champions League and saw that with the support and backing and the financial backing as well at Manchester City that was his next best opportunity to win the Premier League, one of the toughest leagues if not the most competitive in the world, and to also win the Champions League with Manchester City. Also another thing that the club has yet to win. First off, we're going to be looking at the transfers that he brought into the club. Now in 2016-2017, he brought in Claudio Bravo, Nolito, Gundogan, Sane, John Stones, and Gabriel Jesus came into the season halfway through. Now, where there weren't any notable players that left the club at the time. There were obviously players that were sold, but in terms of the context of important to the squad or maybe like academy players, and overall the net spend of the club was about 180 million euros. This was a club that already had Kevin De Bruyne, Raheem Sterling, Vincent Kompany, Fabian Delph, and Sergio Aguero. Now, looking at this isn't necessarily a bad squad to have. You have Gundogan, but granted he was injured when Manchester City bought him, so maybe it's not a good idea to spend so much on a midfielder who's injured for most of the season. They brought in Sane, a very young and at the time on fire winger from Schalke. They brought in Nolito, a quite older player from La Liga from Celta Vigo. He was more of a rotating player. Claudio Bravo to fix up the goalkeeping errors or the goalkeeping troubles, and Gabriel Jesus came midway through the season as kind of a backup to Sergio Aguero. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad team. It's Guardiola's first season, and so the expectations aren't much, because coming into the club, the expectations are to win the league and win the Champions League. In this season, they came third in the Premier League. They failed just outside of the knockout stage in the Champions League, exiting in the round of 16 to the Monaco team that won Ligue 1 and had Mbappe, Bakayoko, Fabinho, Falcao had a good season that year, Bernardo Silva. So this was overall like a really good Monaco team that took them and surprised them. In the FA Cup, they came in the semifinals, and in the EFL Cup, they came in the fourth round. So in his first season, he failed to win a single trophy. Now, personally, with a squad like that, you're competing in 4 competitions. Granted, it's your first season. You should at least win 1 trophy, but we'll give the benefit of the doubt because managers, they need time to implement their style. They need time to coach their players and things like that. You need to get used to the league, so it's fine. They come third. It's not too bad. They're not, too far off. I believe they drew 9 games and lost 6. So maybe, there was just a bit of lack of consistency. They scored a good amount of goals. They conceded not too many. And overall I believe they were close to they were pretty far from Chelsea. They were 15 points behind Chelsea when they won the league in 2016-2017. But overall, first season, I wouldn't say too bad in the league. Now, during that year, there were issues with the goalkeeper and Claudio Bravo. They still weren't able to fix that issue. He didn't deem well enough to be able to fix. He didn't deem suitable enough for the role. And he deemed also that defense was also a lack. They conceded a lot of goals in one-off games, and they weren't overall consistent in the league and in their championships. So Pep Guardiola buys Mendy from Monaco. He buys Kyle Walker from Spurs, Bernardo Silva from Monaco as well, Ederson, Danilo from Real Madrid, and midway through the season he brought Aymeric Laporte. Out of those players, 2, 3, 4 of them were defenders, 1 was a goalkeeper, and 1 was a midfielder. Similar to the season before, there weren't many notable departures. There were obviously players sold, but there weren't any notable big names that left the club and were important or whatever they may have been in terms of their role. The net spend went up by about nearly 50 million euros, and they had a net spend of 225 million euros, which is a lot. So this season, you're expecting something. There was success. In the Premier League, they came first, and they had a 19-point gap to rivals or city rivals of Manchester United. They won 32 of the 38 played games. They only lost 2 of them, so overall consistent. And the 2 games that they lost were to Liverpool, which was the first year that they had Mane, Salah, Firmino. And they also lost to Manchester United 3-2. So the teams that they lost to weren't horrible. You know, they pretty much beat every other team, and they didn't really struggle against any one opponent. But when they did lose games, they were against tough opponents and one-off games. In the Manchester City Liverpool game in the league, they lost 4-3, and against Manchester United, they lost 3-2. So it's not too bad. In the UEFA Champions League, they went out in the quarterfinals. Granted, they did go out to eventual finalists Liverpool, but they lost both games, similar to in the league when Liverpool beat them at home at Anfield, and Liverpool did lose to them in the first half of the season. They lost, actually, interestingly enough, Liverpool lost in the 4th game of the 2017-2018 league season 5-0. So you can see that as time went on, Liverpool started to adapt to Manchester City's playstyle and eventually finished out the year in terms of all games. They beat them with a record of 3-1. They won both legs, and there was an overall aggregate score of, I believe the aggregate score was 5-1 in the favor of Liverpool. In the FA Cup, they went out a lot earlier than they did the season before. In the 5th round, they went out to, I believe it was, one moment. They went out to Wigan Athletic 1-0, so that's disappointing and shouldn't happen no matter what. You have a big enough squad to rotate, there's no excuses. In the EFL Cup, they were the winners, but as usual, I will provide context. The number of top teams that they played, they only really played Arsenal, a top team, like a top 6 team, or even a team just outside the top 6, and the only time they played them was in the final, and they beat them 3-0. So again, not really difficult for them to go out there, but they did lose to Wigan in the FA Cup, so I guess you could say that it's, you know, that's just English football. But either way, in this sense, you could say that this was a successful season. I wouldn't argue against it. They won the Premier League and they won the EFL Cup. They didn't win the Champions League. You know, that's okay. Getting the double, you know, the Premier League is a very, very difficult league, as we see now. You can't even pinpoint what team is good and what team is bad. So, come next season, the only notable signing, I should say, that Pep Guardiola made was Mahrez from Leicester City, and they let go of some players. Again, no notable signings. They sold some players here. I think they sold Kolarov, Fabian Delph, maybe Joe Hart. I don't know exactly who they sold, but again, players who weren't really impactful in the title-winning seasons. They had a net spend of about 30 million euros, so not much in comparison to the last 2 seasons. Now, this year, this was one of their best years. They won the Premier League, but in context, we can see that they drew 2 games, lost 4. They scored 95 goals, conceded 23. So overall, you can see that they're performing. But in context, they were second from week 16 to week 28. They were third in week 19, but that must have been just over 1 game. And from then on, they won their 29th league game and were first ever since. Now, if you go back and look at that season, Liverpool were first for the majority of it, and come around, and I believe past the Christmas break, they started to draw a lot more games. Liverpool had a big lead. I believe it was a 10-plus point lead on the league, and maybe due to their inexperience, all that 29-year wait to win the league, it got to them. Maybe the pressure did get to them. Klopp's, I wouldn't say Klopp's inexperience of a title-winning team, but he hasn't really done it much other than Dortmund. I believe one year he won the league with them. So we can see here that Liverpool kind of handed Manchester City the league win, because if Liverpool maintained their form, they probably would have won the league. In the Champions League, they went out yet again in the quarterfinals, but this time they went out to Tottenham Hotspur. They lost 1 game and won the home game, but due to aggregate and away goals, they went out 4-4. And Tottenham were also the eventual finalists, but as we all know, they lost that final to Liverpool. They won the FA Cup. Again, in context, in the FA Cup, the only top team they played was actually no one. They didn't play a single top 6 team. They didn't play a single team that was just outside the top 6. They had a fairly easy road, so they should win that. If you have easy opposition in any of the rounds, you should beat them, and you should, maybe if you play in the final and lose that one game, it's understandable because they're one-off games. So they did win that. In the EFL Cup, they didn't play against, again, similar to the story in the FA Cup, they didn't play against tough opposition. So, and up until they got to the final, in which they played against Chelsea, and this was a Chelsea team that they thrashed 6-0 in the Premier League, I believe, earlier or just before that game. So Chelsea were able to keep it tight, and they lost, or Manchester City won 4-3 on penalties. So, in comparison to the last season, they not only maintained their title, they went back-to-back in the league against a very strong Liverpool team. And granted, I'm not taking any credit away from them for winning the league, even though Liverpool, you can make an argument that Liverpool threw it. They were able to keep their heads in it. They were able to maintain their form. They didn't give up, and they stuck through and won the league again. They won the FA Cup, and they won the EFL Cup. So 3 trophies. Yet again, they went out in the Champions League. But again, I wouldn't say that this isn't a successful season. I would say it is a successful season. They won the FA Cup, they won the EFL Cup, and they maintained their Premier League title. Come 2019-2020, we see that Danilo and company left. Granted, Danilo, he wasn't really much of an avid starter, but he was part of the team rotation. But the big one, the big player that left or was sold, we can say was Vincent Kompany. Vincent Kompany was a huge, you can tell that he was a leader if you go look at some of the interviews, or you go look at his overall, the way he talks, the way he leads the team on the pitch. He was, in essence, the team's leader. You can compare him to like Ramos, you can compare him to like Rio Ferdinand, Vidic, Puyol. He was their, leader. So losing him is extremely big for the club. Granted, they did buy Cancelo and Rodri. Rodri was meant to replace Fernandinho, because as Fernandinho was getting old, they needed a new holding midfielder, and Cancelo came in to replace Danilo. I believe it was a swap deal between Juventus and Manchester City. It wasn't a direct swap. I believe Cancelo was bought more for what Danilo was sold for, I believe. I can't remember, but that's irrespective of the topic of the video. Their net spend was more than last season's, but it was the second lowest in comparison to the other 4 mentioned. They had a 90.5 million euro net spend. Now, in the Premier League, this was one of their worst seasons. They came second in the Premier League, and they came 18 points behind Liverpool. So it's a very similar gap to their games in to their season when they beat Manchester United by 19 points. They scored 102 goals. They conceded 35. This tells you that a lot of the games, they won 26 games and lost 9. So you can say that a lot of those goals, a lot of those 102 goals were overinflated, as in they came from games where they were already winning. Maybe they won 5-0, 6-0. So you can see where the problems lie. In this season, they lost to Norwich 3-2. They lost to Wolves. They lost to Liverpool. They lost to Manchester United. They lost to Wolves again, and they lost to Spurs. They lost to Manchester United as well. They lost to Chelsea, and they lost to Southampton. Games when they won, they beat West Ham 5-0. Brighton Hove Albion, they beat them 4-0. They beat Watford 8-0. So you can see where the oversaturation and the misleading of just taking stats is a problem. Now, you may be wondering what happened in their other games. They came, and this was during COVID, so the way the Champions League was done was that anything past the quarterfinals was one leg, and then it got drawn against Lyon in a game where they lost 3-1. And this was a game where I actually predicted that they would lose. For as long as Pep Guardiola has had all these players, he doesn't have a set 11. Now, you can break that down to maybe injuries, you can break it down to tactics, whatever it may be. But as we know, the teams that are consistent and the teams that win leagues and titles are the teams that play the same players. Pep Guardiola has a problem where he'll rotate out fullbacks, he'll rotate out center backs, he'll rotate out midfielders, he won't necessarily just rotate just the players in terms of who's playing when, or like for example, instead of Rodri playing, it's Fernandinho, but he'll also rotate just overall positions. So he'll maybe have Bernardo Silva playing one week on the right instead of Mahrez, even though Bernardo Silva is more of a natural midfielder, whereas Mahrez is more of a right winger. What this proves to me is that he can't coach his players. If you want to play a style like that, then that means that you need to be able to coach your players to be able to work with each other, work in different systems, work in different formations, and work in different positions. If you can't coach your players to play in those different positions and different adjustments, then the results that they've had as of last year and this year are going to happen. Inconsistencies, they're not going to win games, they're going to struggle to defend, they're going to struggle to score. In the FA Cup, came in the semifinals. In the EFL Cup, they won. In the FA Cup, I believe they went out in the semis and they went out to Arsenal. Again, the road to the semis was very similar to, as I've said before, they come up against easy opposition. In the EFL Cup, they came up against Manchester United in the semis. They won one game, lost one, but due to aggregate, they won 3-2. They beat Aston Villa in the final 2-1, but it was a tight game because of COVID, so there weren't any fans, so you can say that maybe it added more pressure onto them, but they did win. They won that cup. And so the only trophy they managed to win was the EFL Cup. Now, you can say that COVID was a problem. I won't disagree. Liverpool, when they came back, they were struggling with their league form as well. But in context, before the league seasons got cut off or postponed or whatever word you want to use, Manchester City were already way far behind in comparison to Liverpool. Liverpool got out to an extremely early lead, an extremely large gap. The only reason Liverpool didn't win by more points is because they had bad form coming out of the pandemic, getting back into the flow of games. If Liverpool maintained form, they might have even had like near 20 plus point gap. And I believe they would have actually, because they only were behind by they were ahead by 18 points. So you can see that this season was Manchester City's worst. Now, again, Pep Guardiola likes to he doesn't necessarily like to take blame. A lot of his press conferences I've seen where he kind of doesn't acknowledge the fact that his team played bad, or he doesn't acknowledge the fact that his team just overall isn't performing, or maybe he's not setting them out the right way. He likes to give the excuse of, oh, there's injuries, or because of injuries we have to play different players, or maybe they're not it's just a bad day. But those kind of excuses don't cut it when you're getting 200 million euro net spend and you have players like Aguero, Kevin De Bruyne, John Stones, Laporte, Kyle Walker, Mendy, Gundogan. You have all these players, so you don't have any excuses. Coming to this season, they've bought even more. They bought Fernan Torres, a young winger/striker. Again, I don't really know much about him because he's relatively new, but he's been playing games. But again, Pep Guardiola, he's playing players on the wing and then he plays them striker. Just, again, inconsistent. For some reason, he doesn't like to acknowledge where a player likes to naturally play and just play them in that position. They bought Nathan Ake from Bournemouth. I believe it was about £40 million. And they bought Ruben Diaz from Benfica, another young center back. Both Nathan Ake and Ruben Diaz are young center backs. He bought Ruben Diaz for, I believe it was £50 million, and they sold, or the players that left, only I believe only 3 of them were notable. Maybe you can make an argument for only 2. One was Leroy Sané, and Leroy Sané's departure came mainly off the fact that he was getting injured a lot. Nicolas Otamendi, he was a center back. He went out of favor, I believe, after the 2019 season when they had Laporte. Or no, I believe he went out of favor in the 2018 season once they got Laporte, Stones. They have all those defenders, as well as Company. So the big one, Claudio Bravo left, but the big one was David Silva. David Silva was another one of those marquee players for Manchester City. I wouldn't say in the same picture as Company, as like a leader, but he is someone who can take over. He has a lot of experience. He can kind of help the younger players. He can help lead the team, but maybe not in the same extent as Vincent Kompany. He left as well. Their net spend came out to 110 million euros. He spent 630 million euros. Net spend. That's not how much he spent. His net spend was 630 million euros. Obviously, if you just do how much he spent, it's obviously more than that. How much more? I don't know. I don't believe Manchester City do a good enough job at selling players or offloading players because of Pep Guardiola's, chess style play or beliefs in his system. Personally, I thought that they were going to get rid of him. I thought they were going to get rid of him and either bring in Ancelotti or Pochettino, because when you have players like this, players like De Bruyne, Aguero, Mahrez, you have all these good players at Manchester City, you can switch out managers every other year. Like you can give them a year to implement their style, and then you can kick them out the next year if they have no results. You can do that because most of the time in the current clubs like Arsenal, Manchester United, Liverpool, when Klopp first came in, Leicester City, these are the clubs that need time because they've lost a lot of players. They don't have a lot of good players coming in, and they need time to change. This Manchester City team already has everything needed for change. So, in my opinion, I think he's been a bald fraud. He hasn't lived up to his stature. In 4 seasons, because we've only done 4 full seasons, he's won the Premier League twice, and he hasn't gotten to the semifinals of the Champions League. One of those league titles, again, I'm not taking any credit away from them, but I will say Liverpool threw that second league title. If Liverpool just maintained their form the same way that Manchester City maintained their form to win the league, Liverpool would have won it, no doubt. So 2 out of 4 league titles, and zero. And like I won't even mention the fact that they've won no Champions Leagues. They haven't even made it past the the quarterfinals in 4 years. That is extremely disappointing in comparison again to the money, the squad, and just overall. So, if you agree with my opinion, put a like, share it,